The room was dead silent. No one dared to move, no one dared to breathe. In that suffocating stillness, Marcus Allen stood tall, his hands resting lightly on the wooden table as his voice cut through the air, slow, clear, and cold as steel. I want each of you to understand exactly why you're being fired today. With that single sentence, the room seemed to collapse in on itself. A few tried to avoid his gaze, but Marcus's eyes, deep, sharp, and gleaming like a blade, freshly drawn, moved across every face in the room. There were no more titles, no more chief attendant, Maggie Doyle, no more Mark, Linda, or Jenna. Only people staring into the consequences of their own actions. That morning, the city of Atlanta had awakened under the golden light of dawn. The headquarters of Skybridge Airlines, a towering symbol of American aviation pride, gleamed under the sun, its steel and glass reflecting a cold brilliance. On the 34th floor, an emergency meeting had just begun. News had spread like wildfire. Flight 482, a flight that should have been routine, had thrown the entire company into chaos. Maggie, the head flight attendant, with 20 years of experience, sat hunched in the corner. Her hands trembled so hard she could barely hold the summons paper. Sweat soaked through the back of her uniform. In her mind, one question kept echoing, why him? 2 hours earlier, when she walked into the meeting, she had thought it was just another internal inquiry. A few questions, a written explanation, maybe a warning. But when the door opened and that man walked in, all the sounds around her had vanished. Marcus Allen, the man they had treated as if he wasn't worthy of respect, was now standing before them. Not in an expensive designer suit, not with anger in his tone, but with a calm so unnerving it frightened everyone in the room. He placed his phone on the table. The screen lit up showing the words, "Recording file Flight 48, to Skybridge MP4. The group froze in place. "This is the audio and video from yesterday morning's flight," Marcus said evenly, his voice steady and precise. "What I heard, what I saw, and what you did." His finger slid across the screen. A voice filled the air. "Some people don't know their place. Buying a first-class ticket doesn't mean they belong here." Maggie's voice. Clear, bitter, unmistakable. Linda lowered her head, her lips trembling. Mark tried to steady his breath, but panic was written all over his face. Marcus looked at them, not with rage, not with shouting, but with a disappointment so deep it chilled the room. He remembered that moment when he first boarded the plane. His first-class ticket seat, 2A, his name printed clearly on it, yet the looks he received made him feel like a trespasser. A black man in a tailored suit being asked, "Are you sure this is your seat?" He had smiled, said nothing, and moved on because he was used to it. So used to it that it no longer surprised him, only wearied him. But what he hadn't expected was that those same people, just a few hours later, would cause an entire empire to change. In the meeting room, fear crept into every breath. Maggie tried to speak, her voice cracking. "Mr. Allen, we didn't know who you were." "If we had known, we would never," Marcus cut her off, calm yet firm. "You didn't know who I was, so you thought it was acceptable to treat me that way. If you had known I was the CEO, you would have acted differently. Then the problem isn't how you treat people, it's who you choose to treat with respect, isn't it?" Maggie couldn't answer. The question struck like a knife to the heart. Linda began to cry. Mark stared blankly into space. Marcus didn't raise his voice, but his eyes spoke for him. Respect should never depend on a title, only on humanity. One by one, the people in the room began to recall every detail of that flight, the forced smiles at the unfamiliar passenger, the cold tone saying, "Economy is in the back." The glass of water spilled on his expensive suit without a single apology, and the glances they exchanged filled with disdain as he sat quietly in the first-class cabin, the man who didn't belong here. Those moments now echoed in their minds, like slowed fragments of sound scraping against their conscience. Marcus turned toward the large window, where sunlight streamed through. He remembered his father's words. "Son, you'll have to walk twice as far just to reach halfway. But when you do, don't just walk for yourself. Make the road wider for those who come after you." He took a deep breath, not out of exhaustion, but relief, because at last he had a chance to fulfill that promise. He turned back and spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to tell you that this culture must end, right now." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried through every wall, every corner. Each word landed like a hammer, shattering a fortress of arrogance that had stood for too long. In the corner, Laura Ramirez, newly appointed CEO of Skybridge by the board, watched silently. She didn't speak, just nodded slightly when Marcus finished. In her eyes was not only respect, but a spark of hope. Because even amid crisis, something was being reborn, a new beginning for fairness. Marcus picked up his phone and walked slowly to the door. Before leaving, he paused and looked directly at Maggie, the woman who had once sneered and spoken the cruelest words, now sitting with her head bowed in tears. He said softly, "I don't need you to remember my name. Just remember this moment, when everything could have been normal, but you chose to believe the wrong thing." The door closed behind him, his footsteps echoing steadily down the long hallway. Inside, no one said a word. Only the sound of heavy breathing and the suffocating weight of a lesson learned too late. Outside, the Atlanta sky was clearer than ever. Marcus lifted his head, the sunlight falling across his face, not the dazzling light of power, but the quiet light of justice and change. Because sometimes truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. It only needs one person calm enough to speak it, and the whole world will fall silent to listen. That morning, Seattle was wrapped in a thin veil of mist, cold and damp, as if the entire city was still half asleep. But on the 42nd floor of the West Glass Tower, one man had been awake for hours. Marcus Allen never let an alarm clock ring twice at the same hour. To him, discipline wasn't just a habit, it was heritage. The Patek Philippe watch gleamed on his wrist as he fastened it, reflecting the pale light from the large window. Everything inside the penthouse radiated order, from the glass-covered desk, polished to perfection, to the bookshelf, arranged in precise gradients of color. The only thing that felt truly alive was the framed photo on the shelf, his late father, wearing a worker's shirt, smiling gently through calloused hands. "You'll have to work twice as hard just to get halfway," Marcus's father used to say. But when you arrive, remember, never close that door behind you. Every time those words echoed in his mind, Marcus felt a familiar ache in his chest. He knew those weren't just words of advice, they were a silent will. In the marble-tiled kitchen, the espresso machine hummed steadily. The smell of coffee blended with the freshness of morning filling the room. On the bar counter, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name, Daniel Brooks, Chief Operating Officer. Marcus picked up the call. "The meeting with the investors in Atlanta is still on, right?" Daniel's voice came clear and confident. "Yes, 3 in the afternoon. They seem very excited about the proposal to expand our digital security network across Europe. Good. What about the Skybridge Airlines deal? There was a brief pause before Daniel answered carefully. Their stock dropped another 5%. The infrastructure is solid, but management is problematic. There are rumors about poor service and discrimination going viral. I think you should reconsider. Marcus took a sip of espresso, his eyes fixed on the cloudy skyline outside. That's exactly why I'm taking this flight today. If you want to understand a company's culture, don't read their reports. Experience how they treat the people they think don't matter. He ended the call and opened the wardrobe. Among dozens of grey suits, he chose a dark Armani, perfectly tailored, paired with a deep navy tie. Not flashy, but elegant, just like the way he moved through a world filled with prejudice, visible enough to be noticed, composed enough not to be seen as a threat. At 7:15, his car pulled up in front of the building. The driver, a middle-aged Arab man named Yusuf, opened the door and nodded respectfully. "To the airport, sir, yes. And don't call me Sir Yusuf. Today I'm just a passenger." The remark made Yusuf chuckle, but Marcus didn't smile. He knew too well what it meant to be just a passenger, because sometimes that phrase was another way of saying, "You don't belong here." On the way to the airport, the city's skyline receded in the rearview mirror. Marcus leaned back, eyes tracing the steady stream of traffic ahead. Outside, the sun was starting to break through the clouds, but inside him there was a chill he couldn't quite name, a quiet premonition that this wouldn't be an ordinary flight. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, 8:05 in the morning. The glass doors slid open and a gust of cold air swept in. Marcus stepped out, pulling his smooth brown leather suitcase behind him. Yusuf started to exit the car to help, but a parking attendant rushed over barking orders. "Drop off only, no long stops. Move the car now." The man didn't look at Marcus. His eyes went straight to Yusuf. To him, the black man in the back seat was obviously the driver, while Marcus, dressed in that impeccable suit, must have been the passenger catching a ride. Marcus opened the door and stepped out, adjusting his collar. When the light hit his face, the attendant froze his expression, shifting to brief embarrassment. But instead of apologizing, he muttered, "Sorry." I thought Marcus replied evenly, "It's fine. You just thought." Then he walked away, pulling his suitcase without looking back. Yet behind him, he could still feel the stare, rough and lingering like an old scar that never fully healed. At the check-in counter, everything went smoothly until he reached the priority security lane. He handed over his first-class ticket and diamond membership card. The security agent studied the card, then looked up at him, suspicious. "I'll need to double-check this, sir." "Double-check." It was a phrase Marcus had heard too many times before, a phrase that always seemed reserved for people who looked like him. A white business couple behind him passed through without delay, no questions asked. Marcus took a slow breath and smiled politely. "I'll wait." 10 minutes. 10 long minutes of uneasy silence and curious glances. When the agent finally returned his documents, he said the same rehearsed line. "Thank you for your cooperation," Marcus replied calmly. "And thank you for choosing me at random." His voice was soft, but each word fell heavy as lead. He lifted his suitcase and walked through the security gate, leaving behind a reality he had never been able to escape. The Skybridge Airlines first-class lounge sat apart from the rest, sleek and gleaming. Its frosted glass doors bore the logo of silver wings, the proud emblem of an airline teetering on the edge of collapse. Marcus approached the reception desk. The attendant, Pamela Scott, blonde hair in a tight bun and face set in polite rigidity, scanned him from head to toe before speaking. "Membership card and boarding pass, please." Her tone was formal but cold. She scrutinized the card, hesitating longer than necessary, as if confirming it wasn't fake. "I'll also need to see your ID." Marcus handed her his driver's license with a faint smile. "I take it the platinum membership isn't enough." Pamela didn't answer. She turned and made a hushed phone call. While he waited, Marcus noticed a white man step up behind him, hand over his ticket, and get waved through immediately, no questions asked. Another passenger, a tall man in his late 30s, wearing a light grey suit, had seen everything. He stepped forward and raised an eyebrow. "I fly this route every week. Never seen them do a secondary check. Must be some glitch in the system." Pamela's face flushed red. She returned Marcus's documents stiffly. "System's fine now. You may enter." Marcus nodded, thanking the man. As they walked inside together, the man spoke quietly. "That wasn't right. Does that kind of thing happen to you often?" Marcus shrugged lightly. "Often enough that I've started recording when it does." He raised his phone, showing the active recorder on the screen. Being cautious has become second nature. The man nodded, half in surprise, half in respect. They found seats by the window and started talking about business. Marcus spoke vaguely. "I'm researching a few companies in the transportation sector. There might be an acquisition soon." The man laughed. "If you're buying an airline, I hope you plan on improving their customer service." Marcus didn't reply. His gaze drifted to the runway where a Boeing was being towed into position. The sunlight glinted off its metallic body, and in his eyes there was something both calm and unyielding, the look of a man standing at the final edge of his patience. Across the lounge, the crew for Skybridge Flight 482 had just entered. Leading them was Chief Attendant Maggie Doyle, her voice sharp and commanding. Marcus looked up and their eyes met briefly, just long enough for him to recognize that familiar expression, the look of someone who believed they were standing above others. Marcus opened his voice recorder again, his finger tapping the red button. A routine flight was about to begin. But he knew this one would not end like the others. The loudspeaker voice rolled steadily through the luxurious lounge. "Skybridge Airlines announces that flight number 482 to Atlanta is now boarding. First-class passengers and Diamond members may now board." Marcus set his coffee cup down, gave Brandon a slight nod, then rose to his feet. Pamela's eyes, the lounge attendant's eyes, stayed on him until the glass door closed behind him. In that gaze, there was something both suspicious and dismissive, as if she still did not quite believe that a black man truly belonged in the front cabin. At the boarding gate, the first-class line formed in a neat, orderly row. The boarding agent, Kelly Hart, sharp eyes, and a strained smile raised her voice. "We would now like to invite our first-class passengers and Diamond members to board." Marcus stepped forward, ticket and identification ready in his hand. He stood directly in front of the podium, less than a meter away. Yet Kelly looked right past him, her smile already fixed, aimed at the white passengers behind him. "Sir, this is boarding for first class. Please wait a moment." Marcus replied calmly, his tone low but clear. "I know. I am flying first class." He held out his ticket, his head held high. Kelly froze for a split second, her cheeks flushing red, then hurriedly scanned the code, her voice turning harder. "Oh, I misunderstood. You may board now, sir." Not a single word of apology. Yet the moment he stepped through the door, her voice suddenly turned warm and sugary. "Mr. Fitzgerald, we are so happy to have you on board today." Marcus paused for a brief second and glanced back at the man behind him. Silver hair, polo shirt, relaxed posture. He gave a faint, wry smile, then continued into the jet bridge, a nation proud of equality, still bowing to the wrong people. The aircraft door stood open. The air in first class smelled of wine and new leather. Flight attendant Linda Moore stood at the entrance, her smile bright and polished, until she saw Marcus. In a brief instant, her face stalled, the smile fading as if someone had flipped a switch. "Hello, sir, economy is in the back." Marcus's expression did not change. He held out his ticket. "I am in first class. Seat 2A. Her smile flickered back, on this time tight, and forced her voice shifting into a professional tone. "Oh, my apologies. First class is to your left." He stepped into the cabin, a cold sensation running down his spine. Cream leather seats, delicate privacy curtains. Everything was designed to make people feel privileged. But the glances from a few passengers and from the crew made him feel intruded upon in the very space he had paid to belong to. Marcus lifted his suitcase into the overhead bin, straightened his jacket. Before he could sit down, a male voice spoke up. "Excuse me, sir." The speaker was Mark Lewis, a tall male flight attendant with a face polished smooth as glass, his tone soft but chilly. "There's been a small change. Your seat has been reassigned to 3B. Marcus looked up. "My ticket is for 2A. I booked it 3 weeks ago." "I understand, but we have a frequent flyer who needs that window seat. You are still in first class, only in a different position." Marcus asked, still calm. "And what if I do not agree?" "You are free to return to the gate and speak with a company representative. However, please be aware that we are close to departure." He glanced around. A few passengers had begun to pay attention. A brief silence followed, filled only by the soft hum of the air system. Marcus smiled faintly and folded his ticket. "I will take seat 3B. But I want this noted in the flight report." Mark nodded reluctantly. "Of course." But his eyes said otherwise. Marcus sat down in 3B between 2 white men who were both absorbed in their phones. Window seat 3A remained empty. He took out his phone and reopened the recording app. 1 tap, 1 piece of evidence. 5 minutes later, the cabin door closed. Chief Purser Maggie Doyle walked down the aisle, her gaze sliding over Marcus, then stopping. She did not greet him, only gave the slightest nod, a half smile of polite obligation. During the safety demonstration, her voice flowed evenly. "Skybridge Airlines is honored to serve you. We wish you a comfortable flight." But to Marcus, every dear passenger sounded like a lie. Once the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign switched off. Beverage service began. Jenna, a young brunette flight attendant with sharp eyes, pushed the cart down the aisle. In the first row, she poured champagne into crystal glasses, her voice sweet and charming. "Champagne or red wine, sir?" In row 1, row 2, always the same tone, the same smile. When she reached row 3 and came to Marcus, her words were short. "What are you drinking?" Marcus replied gently. "What are the options? Water, soda, or juice?" He looked at the menu in her hand and asked, "No wine that is reserved for our regular guests." Marcus looked straight at her, his voice lowering. "I am a regular guest. 120,000 miles flown this year." Jenna froze, then smirked slightly. "I will check if we have any wine left." She pushed the cart away. 15 minutes later, Mark returned with a plastic cup filled with clear liquid. "Here is your water, sir. I ordered a gin and tonic." Mark feigned confusion, furrowing his brow. "Oh, I heard water. I will correct that." Another 10 minutes passed before a gin and tonic appeared, still in a plastic cup. Marcus observed carefully. Every other passenger was being served in glassware. Discrimination lived in the smallest details. When lunch service began, Jenna moved past his row without asking for his order. Marcus raised his hand. "We have run out of beef," she said. "You can choose pasta or skip the meal." Marcus smiled. "I will have the pasta. But I can see beef is still being served to the passengers in the row behind me. That is the backup portion." "I am sorry." She turned away, and only after she had finished serving the rest of the cabin did she bring his meal, a plate gone cold and swimming in sauce. Beside him, the man in seat 3C, Harold Grayson, a finance professional, glanced over and lowered his voice. "They are treating you oddly. What line of work are you in?" Marcus answered, "Cybersecurity technology." "Which company?" "Sentinel Core Security." Harold set his fork down and looked up. "You are Marcus Allen." Marcus gave a small nod. Harold's eyes widened. "I read about you in Forbes. You just acquired Data Stream Analytics, didn't you?" "I did." Their conversation grew more relaxed after that. Yet the more they talked, the more Marcus felt the irony sink in. He was being treated like someone beneath them on the very root of a company he was about to buy. When he got up to use the restroom, another flight attendant, Thomas Reed, stopped him. "Sir, the economy lavatory is available that might be more convenient for you." Marcus looked at him, his tone even. "I am seated in first class. The front lavatory is occupied right now. You can wait." At that moment, the first-class lavatory door opened, and a white passenger stepped out. Thomas fell silent and stepped aside. Marcus simply smiled and walked straight in. When he returned to his seat, he heard a familiar voice coming from the galley. "Some people really do not know their place," Maggie was saying. "They buy one first-class ticket and think they are VIP." Jenna replied quietly with a dry laugh. "They think money is all it takes to earn respect." Marcus sat down and quietly opened the recording app again. A soft beep sounded. He was no longer angry, only wrapped in a heavy, deliberate silence. Outside the window, sunlight spilled across the clouds. The plane carved its way through layers of white. In first class, people relaxed, reading newspapers, sipping wine, smiling. Only Marcus sat motionless, his gaze distant. A voice rose in his mind, not from the past, but from within himself. "I fought to sit here in first class. But in the end, the problem is not the seat, it is the way they look at me." And in that moment, Marcus understood. This flight was not just a journey to Atlanta. It was the beginning of a far bigger confrontation, not only between him and a handful of people, but between one man and an entire system that had grown comfortable with its prejudice. The engines hummed softly as Skybridge Flight 482 sliced through the dense cloud layers. Midday light streamed through the window, spilling across Marcus's face, tight and cold, like a violin string about to snap. He stayed silent, but in his eyes a storm was gathering. The crew went on serving as if nothing was wrong, soft laughter drifting out from the galley. Fragments of conversation about difficult passengers and people who thought they were somebody floated through the air, blending with the sound of wine being poured and glasses touching. No one knew that every sound, every word was being recorded. When Jenna came back with the service cart for the second round, she glanced at Marcus with a lazy smile. "Do you need more water?" Marcus gave a small nod, his eyes still fixed on his tablet screen where the Skybridge report glowed in front of him. But only a few seconds later there was a sudden crash, the cup tipped over, and cold water splashed across his lap and the grey suit he was wearing. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." Jenna said the words, but her voice carried no hint of real regret. She handed him exactly one napkin. Marcus stared at the spreading wet stain on his pants, his breath dropping lower into his chest, every muscle in his face tightening. "I need more napkins. I will get some just a minute." But that 1 minute stretched into 5, then 10. Jenna continued serving other rows, laughing and chatting easily, leaving him there damp and chilled, and treated as if he were invisible. The man beside him, Harold Grayson, watched quietly. "She did that on purpose?" he murmured. "I saw it clearly." Marcus gave a brief nod but did not react. He simply picked up his phone and noted the exact time of the incident. Sometimes the voice of the quiet person carries farther than a shout. 15 minutes later, he pressed the call button. The overhead light came on. After a moment, Maggie Doyle, the chief attendant, walked over with a strained smile. "Is there something you need?" Sir Marcus turned to her, his tone low and controlled. "I would like to speak to you about the service on this flight." The cabin gradually grew quieter. Nearby passengers began looking up, sensing that something was about to happen. "From the moment I boarded, my seat was changed without any prior notice." Marcus set his voice steady, as if he were reading a formal report. "I was skipped during service, given a plastic cup instead of glass, told to use the economy restroom, even though I am seated in first class, and I just had water spilled on me without being properly assisted afterward." Maggie tried to hold her composure, her tone suddenly defensive. "Sir, I think there may be a misunderstanding. Differences in service sometimes come from procedures." Marcus cut her off without raising his voice. "What procedure allows you to treat black passengers differently from white passengers?" The air froze. Several people turned to stare. Maggie blinked, rapidly searching for words. "We serve all passengers the same. If you feel uncomfortable, I will make a note of it." "It is more than uncomfortable, Miss Doyle. It is discrimination, and I have been recording everything since before I stepped onto this plane." His words cracked through the cabin like lightning in midair. Maggie went rigid, her face draining of color. Behind her, Jenna and Mark glanced at each other, panic clearly written in their eyes. A man in the row across the aisle, Brian, a frequent flyer on this route, spoke up. "I have been sitting here from the beginning. I have watched them treat him very differently from everyone else. And yes, I think he is right." Maggie turned toward him, her voice now edged with sharpness. "Sir, if you continue to cause a disturbance, I will have to call security to meet you when we land." Marcus met her gaze, calm to the point of being chilling. "Good. I look forward to speaking with them, because I am sure airport security will be very interested in how you are violating federal anti-discrimination laws." A heavy pause followed. Only the engines could be heard. Jenna swallowed hard. Mark stepped back. Maggie, so used to giving orders and being in control, suddenly felt her legs begin to shake. "You know," Marcus said slowly, "if I get angry, people will say I am being disrespectful. If I stay silent, you will believe you are right. Either way, I lose. Unless I record it." He took out his phone, the screen showing a moving audio waveform. "And I have been doing that since Seattle Airport." The moment shattered the cabin's illusion of comfort. First class fell utterly silent. A few passengers held their breath. Maggie tried to steady herself, lowering her voice. "So recording is against company policy, and discrimination is against federal law." Marcus replied, his tone sharp as a blade. "Your internal policy does not stand above the law," the sentence caught in her throat. In all her years of service, no one had ever spoken to her so directly. Marcus rose to his feet, tugging lightly at his vest. It was damp, but his posture was still straight. I do not want anyone to lose their job. I only want a sincere apology and fairness. But instead of apologizing, Maggie chose to protect her pride. You are making the other passengers uncomfortable. I will be reporting you as a disruptive passenger. Go ahead, Marcus said, his voice low, unhurried, but every word landing like a nail. But remember, when you make that call, I will still be recording. From the back of the cabin, whispers started to spread. Someone murmured, "What is going on? I think a first-class passenger is arguing with the crew." A child asked his mother, "Why is that man being scolded?" The mother turned away and did not answer. Marcus sat down again, his eyes fixed on the window. The sky outside stretched out in endless blue, yet he felt trapped inside a box full of prejudice. Harold, seated next to him, spoke softly. "You just did the right thing. Not many people would." Marcus gave a faint smile without taking his eyes off the sky. "We have been silent for too long." From the front galley, Mark and Jenna pulled Maggie aside. Their voices dropped, but the words still reached Marcus's ears. "What do we do now?" "We just say he caused trouble. No one will believe a lone passenger. But what if he really is someone with power? Look at him. Do you really think someone like that has power?" Marcus closed his eyes. He had heard enough. A soft chime sounded the seatbelt sign coming on before descent. Maggie stepped out, her voice trembling slightly, though she still tried to sound authoritative. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing to land in Atlanta. Please turn off all electronic devices completely, not just to airplane mode." Marcus looked up and glanced around. No one else was being reminded. Only him. "I believe regulations allow devices in airplane mode," he said. "We want to ensure absolute safety," Maggie replied, staring straight at him as if trying to punish him with her eyes. Marcus watched her for a second, then placed his phone on the tray table. "Do not worry. I can still record without seeing the screen." His voice was gentle, but enough to make Maggie freeze. The plane touched down on the runway with a heavy shudder. The weight in the cabin did not lift. When the door opened, Maggie moved to the front of the first rows and spoke quietly to two security officers waiting in the jet bridge. Their seat 3B, the disruptive passenger. Marcus stood, picked up his suitcase, and gave Harold a small smile. "We are here." Then he walked out into the bright light of the terminal. The two security officers approached. One of them spoke. "Sir, we have received a report that you were behaving in a disruptive manner." Marcus did not flinch. He held out his phone, his voice still calm. "I think you should listen to this before you decide anything." The screen lit up. Maggie's voice came out clearly. "Some people really do not know their place." The two officers looked at each other. One of them looked up. His expression completely changed. "Thank you, Mr. Allen. We understand now." Marcus nodded, turning back toward the aircraft where Maggie and Jenna stood frozen in place. "We will meet again," he said softly. "But next time it will be in the boardroom." Then he walked away, his back straight, each step echoing down the corridor floor, the footsteps of a man who would no longer be dismissed and who was about to change an entire system. The airport loudspeaker echoed through the glass corridor. "Welcome to Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, Atlanta." People flowed past in constant motion, suitcase wheels clattering on the polished stone floor. In that crowd, Marcus Allen walked with his back straight and his gaze calm. His suit jacket still carried faint water stains, but he did not care. There was no anger on his face, only the quiet resolve of a man about to act. The two security officers were still walking beside him. One of them spoke softly, his tone apologetic, so we listened to the recording. Clearly this was a service issue, not disruptive behavior. We apologize for the misunderstanding. Marcus gave a slight nod. You were just doing your job. But sometimes justice begins when people listen instead of judge. They exchanged a look, their eyes now full of respect. Behind them, the crew stood frozen in the aircraft doorway, watching him go with a mixture of fear and shock. Marcus stopped near a seating area close to the exit gate and took out his phone. It only took a second to find the name he needed. Edward Collins, Chief Executive Officer of Skybridge Airlines. He pressed call, lifted the phone to his ear, and spoke with the calm tone of someone discussing business. Edward, this is Marcus Allen. Marcus, I was just about to call you. Everything all right? Have you landed in Atlanta yet? I just did. On one of your Skybridge flights? Oh, great. How was the service? I hope you had a good experience. Marcus fell silent for a second, then said slowly, Do you have a few minutes? Because I think this flight has shown me very clearly the real culture of your company. Silence answered him from the other end. I just spent 3 hours watching systematic discrimination from check-in all the way until I left the plane, and I have all the evidence I need. A sharp breath sounded over the line. What did you just say? Marcus, are you sure? Very sure. And I will need to speak directly with your board of directors tomorrow morning before I decide whether to move forward with this deal. Marcus ended the call. No anger, no shaking hands. He simply exhaled and watched the flow of people pass by. On the phone screen, his own face reflected back at him, serene but with a storm rising in his eyes. At the same time, on the 32nd floor of Skybridge Airlines headquarters in downtown Atlanta, Edward Collins nearly threw his phone onto the desk. Good God, who allowed this to happen? He shouted, turning to his assistant. Set up an emergency meeting. Call the legal team, and bring me the full crew list for Flight 482. The assistant nodded and rushed out. Edward paced back and forth, sweat beading on his forehead. Only 3 weeks earlier, he had confidently told the board that selling Skybridge to Sentinel Corps would take the company into a new era. Now a single flight, a single failure might destroy that entire future. At 10 o'clock that night, in a suite at the Four Seasons Hotel, Marcus opened his laptop. On the screen was a video conference window showing Daniel Brooks, Chief Operating Officer, Vanessa Chen, Chief Legal Counsel, and James Morris, Communications Director. They were all waiting for him. I am guessing the deal did not go smoothly. Daniel began half joking, half serious. Smoothly, Marcus gave a faint smile. If smoothly means getting doused with water and labeled a disruptive passenger, then yes. The group fell silent. Marcus recounted everything in detail from the airport to the moment airport security confirmed discriminatory behavior. He played the video, opened the audio files, and let them hear the conversations between the flight attendants. When Maggie Doyle's voice came through, some people really do not know their place. Vanessa's hands clenched, and Daniel could only shake his head. You have all the evidence, Vanessa asked. Yes, and a few passengers ready to testify. Vanessa spoke firmly. If you want, we can drag them into court as early as tomorrow. Skybridge will lose 30% of its value in 24 hours. Marcus looked up, his gaze cold. No, I do not want to sue. I want change. You mean still buy them? Daniel asked in surprise. Yes, but this time on our terms. They need to understand that selling the company to me is no longer a choice. It is their salvation. He stood and walked to the window. The city of Atlanta burned bright against the night sky, the lights reflecting on his face, the face of a man forged from both steel and fire. Tomorrow I will meet the board, and I will make them see what I just lived through, not with my words, but with the truth. The next morning at Skybridge headquarters, the main conference room felt like a disturbed beehive. Papers, phones, urgent calls all collided at once. Rumors had already spread down the corridors. The CEO of Sentinel Corps was insulted on one of our flights. Edward Collins sat at the head of the table, his face pale. I want to hear it from the person who was actually on that flight. Get Maggie Doyle in here. The door opened and Maggie walked in with the rest of the crew. Their former air of authority was gone. They were just frightened employees now. Maggie bowed her head. Mr. Collins, I quiet. Edward slammed his hand on the table. Do you have any idea who he is? He is the man considering buying this entire company. And now he has proof that your team discriminated against a customer. No one answered. Jenna began to cry. Mark stammered. We did not know who he was. Edward let out a bitter laugh. That is exactly the problem. You only know how to respect certain people, not everybody. And that is what is dragging this airline straight into hell. He dropped into his chair, exhausted. Prepare yourselves. Mr. Allen has requested to meet the board of directors this morning. If we are lucky, he still wants to negotiate. If not, we are finished. At 11 in the morning, Marcus's car pulled up in front of Skybridge headquarters. As he stepped out, dozens of curious eyes followed him. His suit today was pure black, buttoned neatly with a dark blue tie, simple but commanding. No one looked at him without sensing the presence of a man accustomed to changing entire companies with a single decision. The secretary led him down the corridor into the large boardroom. 12 members of the board were already seated, waiting. The air was thick, every tick of the wall clock echoing in the silence. Edward Collins stood, his smile strained. Mr. Allen, we are deeply sorry for the incident Marcus raised his hand, cutting him off. There is no need to apologize. I did not come here today to listen to remorse. I came to see whether you have the courage to change. He set his laptop on the table and connected it to the large screen. Before we talk about the future, let us revisit the past specifically. Flight 482, yesterday. The screen lit up, and Maggie's voice filled the room. Some people really do not know their place. The room fell completely silent. The faces of the board members went pale. Marcus turned back to them, his voice sharp as a blade. This is how Skybridge employees treat your customers. The question is, do you want to keep running a company like this, or do you want to keep it alive? No one spoke. Marcus looked around the room, his eyes bright as if carrying fire. I will give you until this afternoon to decide. I am not buying an airline. I am buying its soul. If you want to keep that soul, begin by having the courage to face your mistakes. He closed the laptop and stood up. The room remained utterly quiet. Only the sound of his shoes rang against the wooden floor, each step heavy yet resolute, the footsteps of a man who had just turned a personal humiliation into a wake-up call for an entire empire. The boardroom door closed, but the air inside was still thick, as if it had just survived an explosion. No one on the Skybridge Airlines board dared to speak. The large screen froze on the final frame of the recording. Maggie Doyle's face, her lips pressed tight, her eyes full of disdain, her voice echoing through the room like a verdict passed down upon them all. Some people really do not know their place. That sentence was no longer the mocking remark of a flight attendant, but an indictment of an entire system. CEO Edward Collins sank into his chair. His hair was damp with sweat, his hands gripping a wrinkled stack of documents. In front of him, the board members, people who once took pride in an 80-year legacy, sat in silent panic. "I told you," said Elaine Chambers, the chief financial officer, her voice cold. "Our service culture has been a ticking time bomb. We have ignored too many warnings." "This is just an isolated incident," Edward protested, his voice trembling. "A few employees' mistakes cannot represent the whole company." "No," Edward interrupted an older member, William Preston. "You are wrong. If a small group feels comfortable enough to speak that way, it means they believe no one will hold them accountable. And that is the culture you created." The words hit like a stone thrown into boiling water. Every gaze turned toward Edward. He tried to stay composed, but couldn't. I cannot control every employee. No one expects you." To William continued, his tone calm but firm. "What people expect is for you to set a moral standard, strong enough that no one dares to break it." The door opened. The secretary stepped in quietly. "Mr. Allen is waiting in the next room. He wants to know if the board is ready to proceed with negotiations." All eyes shifted to Edward. He nodded heavily. "Bring him in." Marcus entered, not loudly, not theatrically. The light reflected off his black suit, casting his figure in steel. In his hand was only a pen and a thin folder. "I hope you have had time to think," he said evenly. "I am not here to win. I am here to change." Edward stood, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Mr. Allen, first allow me to offer the company's deepest apologies." "An apology is a beginning, not an ending," Marcus interrupted. "I do not need words of regret if tomorrow, when another passenger who looks different from me boards your plane, they are treated the same way I was." He placed the folder on the table. "I am not here to demand compensation. I am here to set conditions." The atmosphere shifted, as if the air pressure in the room had changed. 4 conditions, Marcus's voice, steady each word, landing like a nail. First, restructure the entire employee training program. Every flight attendant, gate agent, and ground staff member must undergo anti-bias and equality training. Second, establish an independent service culture oversight division that reports directly to the board, not through the CEO. Third, the entire crew of Flight 482, along with any senior managers who knew and did nothing, will have their contracts terminated immediately. And finally, Marcus lifted his gaze, his eyes sharp as a blade. Edward Collins must resign. The room fell into absolute silence. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard, like the beating hearts of those inside. Edward stood still for several seconds, then gave a dry, broken laugh. "You are asking me to sacrifice my honor, my 30-year career for one flight?" "No," Marcus replied slowly. "I am asking you to return the soul of the company you lost." A board member spoke up, "And if we refuse?" Marcus looked around the room, his eyes blazing. "Then the deal is off, and I will not stay silent. I will make every piece of evidence public. The press will take care of the rest." Elaine Chambers folded her hands, her tone calm but heavy. "We are on the edge of bankruptcy, Edward. If we do not sell, we collapse. If we sell, at least we have a chance to survive." William Preston nodded. "We have no other choice." Edward looked around, but everyone avoided his eyes. In that moment, The man who had once led tens of thousands of employees realized that power is not lost through failure, it is lost through isolation. He sat down, his voice hoarse. "Fine, I will step down. But remember, Skybridge once was the pride of this nation." "And it will be again," Marcus replied, "but this time not for profit, for people." The vote took place. The result 7 in favor 5 against. Edward Collins was officially removed from his position as CEO. As he left the room, his shoulders trembled slightly. Marcus watched him go, not with contempt, but with quiet sorrow. "I do not hate you," he said softly. "I only regret that you forgot who you really serve. It is not the shareholders. It is the passengers." Edward stopped at the door, turning back with tired eyes. "You do not understand, Marcus. Here we live by unspoken rules." "Oh, I understand," Marcus replied, "but it is exactly those unspoken rules that are killing you." The door closed, and at that moment Skybridge took a different path. Marcus stood in the center of the room, light spilling across his face. "I do not want a company that has been bought," he said, his voice gentler now. "I want a symbol reborn, an airline where every person, whether an engineer, a flight attendant, or a passenger, feels respected." He extended his hand. William Preston clasped it firmly, meeting his gaze. "You just did what we never dared to." "Thank you, Marcus." The meeting ended. As Marcus stepped into the hallway, employees passing by stopped in their tracks. They did not know exactly what had happened, only that there was talk of a black man who made an entire company bow its head. But in their eyes, there was no curiosity, only a spark of hope. Marcus paused before the glass wall, looking down at the city lighting up below. A thin rain blurred the distant glow. He smiled slightly and whispered as if speaking to himself. "Sometimes to change an entire system, you do not need power. You just need a reason that is right enough." He tightened his grip on the folder in his hand. Tomorrow, Sentinel Corps would officially take over Skybridge. But tonight, Marcus knew that what he had truly gained was not a multi-billion-dollar acquisition, but the belief that justice, when spoken with calm and courage, can still make the world fall silent and listen. The afternoon rain in Atlanta fell like a silver curtain covering the tall glass windows of the Skybridge Airlines headquarters. Inside a small conference room on the 18th floor, the air was heavy, as if the entire sky was pressing down on the people inside. Maggie Doyle sat silently, her fingers tightly interlaced. Beside her were Mark, Linda Jenner, and several other members of Flight Crew 482. They had been summoned immediately after the morning vote. On the table in front of each of them lay a sealed envelope. No one needed to open it to know what was inside. Termination notice. Linda whispered, her voice trembling. No one responded. Outside the window, the sound of rain tapped slowly like the rhythm of fate. The door opened. Human Resources Director Karen Lee entered, her face calm and severe, followed by 2 security officers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said evenly, "the board has reviewed all the evidence. The behavior of Flight Crew 482 has seriously violated company policy and federal law. Your terminations take effect immediately." Jenna burst into tears, tears running down her cheeks. "We've served this airline for over 10 years, she cried. "Are we being treated like criminals because of one passenger?" Karen met her eyes. "Not because of one passenger, but because of the way you saw them." The room went completely still. Maggie gripped her envelope, lifted her head, her voice trembling, but still clinging to pride. We were only following the standards this company taught us to serve regulars and VIPs first. We didn't discriminate against anyone. Karen placed a thick file on the table, her tone still calm. 37 complaints in 12 months, all about this crew, all describing the same thing, different treatment toward black customers, Asian customers, or those with non-Anglo names, and nearly all were dismissed by management. Maggie stared at the file, the color draining from her face. I didn't know there were that many. Because you never wanted to know, Karen replied. Sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't malice, but the habit of looking down on others while believing you're doing the right thing. The door opened again. Marcus Allen walked in. The atmosphere changed instantly. The crying stopped. The excuses stopped. Only silence remained heavy and unbroken. He wore a grey suit, no tie. His voice was low, steady, not cold, not harsh, just truthful. I know Marcus said you're afraid. Afraid of losing your jobs. Afraid of being judged. But what you should fear isn't me. It's the moment you stop seeing others as human beings. Jenna lowered her head, sobbing. We didn't mean any harm, I believe that Marcus replied, because discrimination doesn't always come from hatred. Sometimes it's born from indifference. He stepped closer to the table, meeting each of their eyes. You're not being fired because you offended a CEO. You're being fired because you offended the very profession you chose, a profession built to serve, not to judge. Maggie raised her head, tears glistening, but her voice still stiff. Mr. Allen, I've worked here for 20 years. I've trained generations of attendants to uphold standards to protect the brand. I'm not a bad person. I just did what I was taught. Marcus paused for a second, then asked quietly, and when that brand began building itself on prejudice, did you ever stop to ask what it was you were protecting? Maggie couldn't answer. Her hands trembled as she crushed the envelope in her grip. He turned to Karen. Have you prepared the reform program? Yes, Mr. Allen, she replied. The new department, Customer Advocacy, will be established next week. Every passenger complaint will be received and handled directly. Marcus nodded. Good. I want every new employee to understand that service isn't about smiling for a tip. It's about respecting people even when they don't look like you. He turned back to the crew, his voice lowering. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to make you wake up. Linda's tears fell again as she whispered, If you give us another chance, we'll change. Marcus looked at her. His eyes filled with quiet sadness. Opportunity isn't lost. It just moves on to someone else. But if you truly want to change, start by teaching your children to see the world differently, because the next generation can fix what we broke. When he left the room, silence lingered. Only the sound of rain against the glass remained, blending with the uneven breathing of people who had just lost their jobs and perhaps just rediscovered their conscience. Karen followed Marcus into the hallway. Do you think they'll understand? She asked. Not right away, Marcus said, his eyes on the rain. But shame is a better teacher than any training session. At the same time, upstairs, the board meeting was underway. On the screen, the new Skybridge logo appeared 2 silver wings, intertwined into an equal sign, symbolizing fairness and equality. Laura Ramirez, the newly appointed CEO, was presenting the restructuring plan. Marcus sat beside her, quietly observing. Skybridge will be reborn, Laura said with steady conviction. We won't just change colors or uniforms. We'll change our mindset. Every flight will be a promise that no one is seen as lesser because of how they look. A board member asked, But what if customers don't believe it? What if they think this is just public relations? Marcus answered. Then we prove it through action, not advertising, not slogans. Real stories from our own employees. Laura smiled and nodded. I think you just described exactly the spirit we need. The meeting ended. As everyone left, Marcus stayed behind, watching the new logo spin slowly on the screen. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight pierced through the clouds, reflecting off the glass, and making the silver equal sign glow. He remembered that flight, the cold stares, the cutting words. They had hurt him, but they had also created the chance for change. Justice isn't punishment. He thought it's restoring the way we measure humanity. He turned and walked away. In the evening light, his shadow stretched long across the corridor, the silhouette of a man who had chosen forgiveness, but not forgetfulness. Downstairs, Maggie still sat alone, her envelope unopened. Outside, the sky had cleared. She glanced toward the window where the reflection of 2 silver wings glimmered in the sunlight. In that moment, a single tear fell. Not because she had lost her job, but because for the first time in her life, she understood what it meant to be ashamed of herself. 6 months later. The sky over Chicago was a clear, endless blue, reflected in the gleaming glass of the new tower, bearing the Skybridge Airlines logo, 2 silver wings, embracing an equal sign, shimmering in the morning light. Once a struggling airline on the brink of collapse at Skybridge had become the centerpiece of international media attention. But for Marcus Allen, what made him proud wasn't the soaring stock price, it was the transformation in people. That morning, he arrived at O'Hare Airport earlier than usual. Dressed in a light grey suit and navy blue tie, he walked among passengers unnoticed. He didn't need recognition or special treatment. What he wanted was to see with his own eyes whether the change he had sparked was real. The glass doors of the check-in area opened, and the familiar scent of coffee filled the air. A young Latin employee greeted him with a bright smile. "Good morning, sir. Which class are you flying today?" "First class, Skybridge, Flight 218 to New York." "Perfect. I'll take care of that for you right away." There was no suspicious glance, no impatient sigh. Every movement was smooth, polite, and genuine. When the employee handed back his ticket, he added warmly, "Thank you for choosing Skybridge. We're working every day to be worthy of your trust." Marcus gave a small nod. Such a simple sentence, yet it warmed his heart. The first lounge now looked completely different. The once cold walls had been replaced with warm wood tones. On the central wall a message read, "Respect is the first-class ticket for everyone." A black woman in her 30s approached with a welcoming smile. "Good morning, Mr. Allen. It's an honor to see you again." Marcus paused, surprised. "You know me, of course." "I'm Danielle Moore, the new lounge supervisor. You came here during the retraining program. Your speech that day made me decide to stay." Marcus looked at her and saw something in her eyes, the light of belief, not fear. "So how is it now for the staff?" Danielle smiled. "We're being heard. We're learning to understand our passengers again. And most of all, we're reminded every day that this job isn't just about serving, it's about giving respect." Marcus nodded. He looked around. Everyone worked with a new energy calm, graceful, sincere. He thought of Maggie Doyle and the old crew. He wondered where they were now, perhaps learning how to start over. He no longer felt anger toward them. They had simply been products of an outdated system, and somehow he had helped that system renew itself. When boarding began, Marcus walked to the gate. The gate attendant, a young Asian man with a brisk manner, stood up as soon as he saw him. "Welcome back to Skybridge, Mr. Allen. Thank you for giving us a second chance." The words caught Marcus off guard. It wasn't flattery, it was gratitude. He smiled. We created that second chance together. Inside the first-class cabin, Marcus stopped just at the aircraft door. A black female pilot in a crisp uniform was shaking hands with passengers. "Good afternoon. I'm Captain Renee Cooper, the captain for today's flight. Welcome aboard, Mr. Allen." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You're the captain?" "Yes, sir. One of 3 new female captains promoted through the company's equality program. Thanks to you, I have the chance to stand here." He smiled warmly. "No thanks to you, and to everyone who dared to believe they deserve it." As he settled into seat 2A, the same seat from that unforgettable flight, a strange feeling washed over him. Once this was where he had been denied his place, made to feel like he didn't belong. Now it was a seat of memory and redemption. A flight attendant approached with a smile. "Mr. Allen, would you like a drink before lunch? Red wine, champagne, or a cocktail?" Marcus chuckled. "Gin and tonic, please. And don't worry, I know it'll be served in a glass." The attendant laughed, a blush rising to her cheeks. We heard that story during our training. And yes, every glass is real glass now. They both laughed, and the cabin's atmosphere felt light and easy. As the plane ascended, Marcus looked out the window. The city below grew smaller. He replayed the journey in his mind, the humiliation, the confrontation, the decisive meeting, the stunned faces when he turned the tables. The memories ran through him like scenes from a slow-motion film. But what he remembered most wasn't the anger. It was the moment he decided not to stay silent. Once the flight reached cruising altitude, a male attendant approached. "Sir CEO Laura Ramirez sends her regards. Today marks the 1 millionth flight since the restructuring, and the company would like to present you with a special gift." He handed Marcus a small velvet box. Inside was a miniature Boeing 787 model, bearing the new logo with silver words engraved on its side, "To the man who taught us how to fly again." Marcus smiled softly. His hand brushed the model's smooth surface, as if touching his own past. "They don't need to thank me," he said quietly. "I just reminded them of what they once forgot." A short while later, lunch was served. Marcus noticed something different. The menu reflected cultural diversity, from sushi to pasta, from Greek salad to South American corn cakes. A small detail, but one that embodied the new Skybridge spirit, respect for difference. The man seated next to him, a middle-aged white passenger, turned and smiled. "I heard this airline used to have a discrimination scandal. Now they're incredible," Marcus replied softly. "Sometimes scandal is the only thing powerful enough to wake a conscience." As the plane began its descent, Marcus placed the model plane back into his briefcase and gazed out the window. The clouds spread like ribbons, and in that quiet moment he realized every journey has a destination, but not an ending. He thought about the future, about other airlines, other industries where prejudice and silence still lived. Skybridge had changed, yes, but the world still needed many more Flight 482s to awaken. Truth cannot rise if its wings are broken, he thought. That's why we must be the ones to keep it flying. When the plane touched down, the cabin erupted in applause. A woman of Asian descent, holding a child in her arms, looked at Marcus and said softly, "I don't know who you are, but thank you for helping this airline change. I'm not afraid to fly anymore." Marcus smiled at her. Don't thank me. Thank the people who dared to relearn kindness. The cabin door opened. The golden light of late afternoon fell across his face. And in that moment, Marcus understood, justice isn't written in law books. It's etched in the way people choose to look at one another with respect. The sunset spread its golden light across the glass walls of Skybridge Airlines' new terminal. A long line of passengers moved beneath the glowing sign of 2 silver wings, the emblem Marcus Allen had chosen. There were no more divides, no more judging eyes. Only the smiles of people moving together through the same space, equals in every way. Marcus stood by the mezzanine window looking down at the airfield. There, a Boeing 787, bearing the number 482, was preparing for takeoff once again. This time, it was no longer the flight of humiliation, but the flight of rebirth. Beside him, Laura Ramirez approached, holding a stack of reports. Revenue is up 18%, customer satisfaction has reached its highest level in company history. But the most important thing, the rate of complaints related to discrimination, has dropped to almost 0. Marcus nodded slightly, a faint smile on his face. I don't care about numbers. I care about how people feel when they sit in those seats. Whether they're treated like human beings, that's the only measure that matters. Laura looked at him, her eyes filled with respect. You know, everyone calls you the silent reformer, the man who changed everything without needing to shout. Marcus smiled softly. I just reminded them of what they had forgotten, that every business exists not to dominate, but to serve. The airport loudspeaker came alive. Skybridge Flight 482 is ready for departure. Marcus watched as the aircraft lifted gracefully from the runway, its silver wings glinting in the fading light. He whispered, sometimes change doesn't begin with power, but with one small act saying no, when everyone else stays silent. The plane climbed higher, piercing through the clouds. In the glow of dusk, its metallic body shimmered, as if carrying with it the faith of thousands of people learning to fly again, learning to believe in what is right. And Marcus knew the greatest legacy he would ever leave behind wasn't an airline reborn, but a new generation that understood justice could take flight too. Night draped itself over the city, and the lights from the Skybridge Tower shimmered like falling stars. In the top-floor office, Marcus Allen sat quietly before the window. On his desk, the model of a Boeing 787 rested still, reflecting a soft blue glow. He reached out and touched it gently, feeling a quiet stirring inside, not out of pride, but from the understanding that every wound can someday become a pair of wings. Outside the airport pulsed with life. One plane after another took off, gleaming in the darkness like silver arrows piercing the night sky. And in each of them Marcus knew there were people flying not just powered by fuel, but by faith in respect. The door behind him opened. Laura Ramirez entered, holding an envelope. Mr. Allen, this is the 6-month report. Skybridge has officially exceeded its projected profits. But what's even more remarkable is that over 90% of passengers said they could feel a difference in humanity. Marcus smiled. Then we did the right thing. When people feel respected, they don't just come back, they bring their trust with them. He stood and looked out through the glass, his voice low but warm. That day I had water spilled on me. I was treated as though I didn't belong here. But that very moment taught me something. Sometimes to change the world you have to get wet first. Laura remained silent, Outside, the night sky glowed with streaks of silver light soaring upward. Justice Marcus said softly, "Doesn't live in courtrooms. It lives in how we treat each other every single day. When people learn to see one another with respect, the world will become fair on its own." The last plane left the runway and climbed into the sky. Marcus smiled faintly. "That's what I truly wanted, to build a place where everyone can fly." He turned off the lights, leaving only the reflection of the city shining on the plane model. In the stillness, justice was no longer a promise. It had become a pair of wings spread wide across the sky. From the perspective of a leadership ethics expert, Marcus Allen's journey is not merely the story of a business deal, but proof that a culture of respect is the greatest invisible asset any organization can possess. A company can lose money, it can lose reputation, but once it loses trust, it loses its very soul. And only when it dares to confront its own mistakes does it earn the chance to be reborn. Marcus proved that justice doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes it only needs one person calm enough to say enough. Like Skybridge, each of us has the power to change the systems around us, simply by starting with how we choose to see others. If you believe that respect can help the world rise higher, hit like to share this message and subscribe so you won't miss more stories where humanity reclaims its dignity in the face of injustice. And leave a comment below a simple but powerful promise: keep respect.